Very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
First of many.
Bugger. I'm just going to get some water.
Yeah.
Be right back.
Leave that playing.
Yeah.
Recording. Do you want some water?
Oh, all right, thank you. Yeah.
Let's get this right. It's about right, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Move that out of the way. Perfect. All right, so we were talking the other day about when to start, where you start from in terms of sort of looking at history.
Yeah.
Because it's infinite. You could go back and go back and go back and go back, right? But and your knowledge is insane. You know, your history knowledge is insane. It's crazy, right? But
It's all those Google rabbit holes.
yeah. But you know, it's kind of picking unless where do you how do you pick a place to start? Where do you start? So for me, and this is I guess a question to you, is a good place to start from keeping in mind this my focus is economics. Is a good place to start World War II?
Yeah.
Because I would say World War II sort of created the world that we live in, economically,
Yeah.
politically, demographically, the world we live in today. And then immediately prior to World War II was a very different world. So we could kind of talk a little bit about that, kind of set the stage as kind of where the world was before World War II, but
Yeah.
not kind of like a snapshot of the world, but not go any further back, not sort of talk about how we got there, just sort of where we were.
Yeah.
And then from World War II onwards, talk about kind of how it created the world that we know today. Does that make sense? Is that a good
Yeah.
Is that a good place to
Well,
start?
You could yeah, I guess so, because World War II did definitely change a lot of things, and the sort of catalyst for that, again, part of what you do, you'll find something that interests you. But the good thing about history is there's never a sort of all-encapsulating thing. There's never really a true start point, because when you get to that point, then you think, oh, how did we get there? And you go back a bit further.
There's always something that predates it.
Yeah. So like
As you
World
go
War
further
II
down the rabbit hole.
inherently has a World War One, because otherwise
Right.
you wouldn't have a second.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, right, yeah, okay.
And then you think, oh, okay, so you get even then you hear World War II, and you think, oh God, what was World War One like? If there was a second one, what happened with World War One?
Right.
And then you go there and you see what happened there. And yeah, I'd say though, from like where the world is today,
Yep.
a lot of it can be traced back to
Sort of the big bang of it, if you will.
yeah, I'd say the Big Bang, where you have that poof, that explosion, and then everything shoots off on a set trajectory.
Yes.
And wherever it ends up over there is because of this event here. I'd say it's probably World War One, because one of the
Really?
main triggers of World War Two was the unfair treaties that were signed. I think it was the Treaty of Versailles. It was particularly harsh on Germany, and then because of that, a lot of German people didn't have any money. They had hyperinflation. A wheelbarrow of cash for a small bit of bread type thing. That gives birth to someone like Hitler and his party to say, "Oh, I'm the big man. I'll fix it all, and I'll stick it to these allies who put all these things out." Somehow he does it. I don't quite know how he does it, but it's a little bit of a miracle. So he then gets momentum for his own ideology to expand, and then that's how you get World War II, all because of World War One happening. And why did World War One happen? Because again, more nations were getting a bit expansionist and rivalries were coming up for different reasons.
Sure.
Yeah.
So between World War One and World War Two, then to get a picture economically of where the world was,
Yeah.
and politically where the world was at that time, it was very much a world made up of different empires. It was an imperial-based world. Would you,
Yeah.
would you agree with that? So, there was,
Certainly before World War II, because World War One expanded that, ironically.
so we were already there, but World War One actually expanded that.
Yeah. So the interwar
Okay.
years between World War One and Two, Britain was at its biggest.
So between World War One and World War Two, Britain was the world. It's safe to say, or it's arguable to say, that Britain was the world's superpower at the time.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
In sort of, in terms of how much influence we had, how much military
Yeah.
power we had, and
That and maybe Russia, communist Russia, because they were fighting several wars at that time. They weren't that good, but they were still looking to expand. And then, going into World War II, they had Poland, for example.
yeah,
No, the Polish beat them. Excuse me. Yeah.
going into World War Two.
Yeah. They had a Polish War of Independence, I think it was, and the Polish won. They beat the communists. Yeah, and then they.
But then post World War Two.
Yeah, because Germany had taken them.
Right.
The Soviets filled that gap. Yeah, but yeah, you had the Soviets, the interwar years, once Germany was out of the way, a lot of the Allies were focusing on the East, especially the Americans and the Brits, because that was an ideology, a system of government which could take over the status quo, rip the mat out from underneath them, and really sort of sway things like it did there. And all the guys in the city of London and I don't know, Washington were looking at that quite eagerly and thinking, oh, we need to take care of this because that's a threat to us.
Yeah.
Because it's just a different way of government. It's not necessarily more good or more evil. I guess that can be debated, but the fact that it posed a risk to them being at the king of the castles, and they may not. The whole point of that is of communism to redistribute that.
A line.
Yeah.
Which is geographically east and west, but what it really is a line between two very different ideologies.
Yeah. It just so happens that that line is east and west, communist, capitalist, this, that. It was just like those two sides were. It was a line that was driven through several parameters, and it just so happened that the same people were on one side of those parameters and also on the other. It was the same group of people, so there was a lot of division. And that was sort of the main focus of that. And then when Germany started to rear its head in the 30s with Hitler, then that's when they think, okay, we need to refocus our gaze, realign our gaze to, for Britain especially, the closer threat, which turned out to be German expansion. And then that led to World War II, because we started that with that declaration.
So, after World War II then,
Yeah.
The empires, the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, the French Empire, the Russian Empire, if you want to call it that, the various superpowers, after World War II, sort of lost their power to America, but not so much because America became a superpower, because they were the only superpower left after the war. Would you agree that to some extent? And then they then had the sort of ability to influence how the world was going to, the direction the world was going to take after that point. Is that your kind of understanding of what happened?
I'd say that's fair, because there was this agreement between Britain and America where the Brits, we were like, it's quite dire.
We lost a lot of our navy, for example. We
Yeah.
were very badly wounded. Even though we weren't actually invaded, we were very badly wounded after the war.
Yeah, we were on the
Militarily.
ropes. Around the Battle
Right.
of Britain time, we were on the ropes, because our expeditionary force, our land fighting forces, were pushed right to the beachhead of Dunkirk, the very famous rescue of the civilians coming to the civilians coming to rescue the army. That shouldn't really happen. If the army or the navy was sufficient enough, then they would be doing it, but not counting on civilians.
Right.
So
Right.
that shows that,
Movie.
we were really, great movie. That shows we were really quite, on dire straits, if you will, and things were really sort of close to the wire in terms of, you know, we thought we were going to be invaded next. There were secret armies being set up, and as far back as where you and I live, in the sort of southwest Midlands area, because that's what they were anticipating. And because of that, a lot of people didn't want. We did have quite a, like with radar, we had quite a lot of other inventions and quite a lot of technology that we were going to bring, but because of that threat and because of all the other threats, we didn't have the resources to turn them into, or to fruition them into reality. So we sent them over to America, and they developed it instead. And then when they came into the war, all those inventions and stuff and those designs that we sent to them were realised because they had the biggest manufacturing base in the world, the most productive manufacturing base in the world. You know, if you look at people like,
What sort of inventions did we send over to you?
I don't quite know.
We
but
willingly gave up technology to
yeah, or designs for them. I found it down a Wikipedia rabbit hole somewhere, but you know, if you Google some kind of like World War II engineering agreement between Britain and America, you'll be able to find it through a few clicks, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then America was really just a massive manufacturing base for years and years and years. And when Pearl Harbor happened, that just sort of awoke this sleeping giant where their military was not the best, but they're okay. But their technology and their manufacturing base, with the designs from Britain, really helped them change the tide of the war. I mean, you only have to look at the hydrogen bomb or the atomic bomb to really sort of put the fairy on top of that Christmas tree.
Sure.
But after that, because of that, actually, I have a really interesting stat because of the economics of it. America, after World War II, going around to the 50s, with all the stuff they got involved with the Allies and whatnot, they owned 50% of the world's wealth. One nation owned or controlled and had heavy influence over 50% of the entire wealth of the world.
And this is at what period in time after World War II?
47, 48 maybe.
Okay, so close to it.
Yeah, and then that's what went on to fund it's called the Manhattan Project, but the other project where they then dumped a load of money into Japan and into West Berlin, Germany, and France to really sort of bring them back up.
Yeah.
As part of
Post Bretton Woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In order to sort of make them all fruition and show how, be a case study and example of how good capitalism is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but it was also, we were bribing up an alliance, weren't we, to protect ourselves from the communists, or
Yeah.
they to protect themselves from the communists. As in, I would say that, as part of the, to sort of read between the lines of the Bretton Woods Act post World War II.
yeah.
The American Navy and the American power, the only one really left after the war,
Yeah.
sort of said to everybody west of the communist line, we will aid you in your economic growth. We will open up our markets to you. We will we will offer you, without using our navy, we will offer you secure shipping between all nations. But in addition, the caveat to that is you've got to sort of act as essentially cannon fodder if a war breaks out between us and the communists, because we're between America and,
Yeah.
and the East.
Yeah.
So
That's my understanding of it,
Right.
which is that if something were to have kicked off in the Cold War period,
yeah, we would be the fodder.
yeah, the whole point of Europe or NATO really and training those forces would be not to beat back the Russians, but to slow them down, so that when they get into Paris or Dunkirk, looking to island hop to the UK, then the United States would have sort of gotten out of its slumber or generated enough of a task force to cross to the Atlantic and be ready for another European theatre of war. I'm probably on something that would put D-Day to shame.
Right.
But the whole point would be Russia would get to Berlin as the Americans are getting onto the continent, and that would probably be a week or two. to do that. And the whole point of NATO is just to slow it down. Although looking at the Russian army at the moment, they might be a lot more successful than they anticipated back in 50 years back now. Yeah, maybe they didn't have that much to worry about at all.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting thing to watch over the last couple of years, isn't it?
Yeah, I never thought someone as batshit as Prigozhin would not only be the best sort of Russian fighting force, but then almost topple Putin.
Yeah.
That I never anticipated that. You know, that's like history book shit you read back in like primary school about people overthrowing, and it's like that's happening in what 2020 or 2024 now, 2023. You had
last year,
you had a military convoy heading for Moscow. I mean, that's the kind, you know, you read about Napoleon doing that shit, not some like big-faced balloon person.
The Russians do seem to have lost the ability to fight in one war, don't they?
Yeah.
They really do, which you know, from what I've read, doesn't make certainly the Americans or anybody in the West, any intelligence agency in the West, happy at all. That makes them I believe that's making them quite nervous.
What about Prigozhin going for?
No, just the fact that the Russians are doing quite badly. That's not making people necessarily happy, because if they feel threatened, they have ultimately got a nuclear arsenal at their disposal.
Yeah, that was the worry. Is that like because if they're really being beaten back, then obviously they're going to use it. They'll probably use it tactical, but still it would be.
Where would they, in your opinion, if it was to go that far, if it was to go nuclear, how do you personally see that playing out?
I reckon they would go.
What are the
for,
sort of potential options for that happening?
I reckon even though they're like crazy, I don't think they're that crazy to go for a capital city and wipe out, I don't know, Warsaw, for example, or Berlin.
Really?
I think traditionally they take a little bit to see what the reaction is. Poke the bear, poke the bear, poke the bear.
Well, talk to me about nuclear weapons, because I know very little about nuclear weapons. So there's not one variety, right? There, one type. There is a variety of nuclear weapons. So.
Yeah, and I think it's down to the science on how they create that explosion, like fusion and fission and whatnot.
So there's sort of like call it range, call it devastation.
Yeah.
But isn't there also sort of like, for example, some can get further than others. Like,
yeah.
Like are they all launched from Russia proper, or are some of them on submarines? Are some of them stationed in Cuba, for example?
I don't think they have.
What sort of a reach do they have? Global reach do they have from a nuclear perspective?
Well, they still have the old Soviet technology, and they can probably reach Washington and therefore anywhere in Europe. That technology has not gone away.
So regardless of its point of origin, whether it be a sub, let's say a submarine, for example, the Russians have the capability of getting nuclear weapons to Washington.
Yeah.
And would it land? Have the Americans got any defense against? What's the word I'm looking for?
Air defense.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
I think they have, because originally.
Doesn't that mean a nuclear bomb explodes
in the sky?
In the sky,
which has happened before. The Americans do it. Like, what if it goes boom in the sky instead of boom on the ground?
Right.
And they even had plans to make it go boom on the moon. They wanted to make a nuclear explosion on the moon.
Why?
To show the Russians what they could do.
Okay.
Yeah. And like scare them a bit, but obviously someone with a bit more sense said, "What the hell are you doing? Don't do that."
Yeah, no, sure.
But yeah,
But doesn't that also mean that the place is equally uninhabitable if it blows up in the sky? Like it's gonna,
I don't know actually. I think it probably did have an effect. I don't know where they did it. I think they must have done it over somewhere uninhabited, like in the ocean or somewhere, or above an ocean somewhere. I don't think they did it over like populated landmass or heavily populated landmass.
So you could say that there's a very real possibility that the Russians could get a nuclear weapon to Washington. There's a very real possibility that they could deploy some sort of countermeasure against that. But there's a very real possibility they could get there.
Yeah.
And if they got weapons that could take out all of Washington. Is that possible? Like,
Yeah. Their biggest bomb that was ever tested was the Tsar bomber, which I think was like 50 miles wide or something silly like that.
50 miles.
I think so. Oh no, I think I'm getting confused. It's like 50 or 100 megatons. But the mushroom cloud was miles wide, and the plane it bombed from, one of those Tu-95 Bears, they had to really sort of get shit hot away after they
dropped it.
dropped it because it wasn't a confirmation that they were going to survive.
Really?
Yeah, they were risking their lives.
It was a high threat level mission.
Yeah, they had they did it somewhere like off the coast of the North Pole, and I think if you look on Google Maps, the land is still scarred. It'll be like someone's probably dropped a pin there and said like this is where it was dropped.
Yeah.
You can tell because it's a part of the Russian landmass. It's right at the north, and there's like it's just all black.
And
It's
what
like,
is
it's like
that?
a charred bit of pizza or something.
Really?
Yeah.
And what is that? You know, like that. You know, that place is then a radioactive wasteland. For
Yeah,
however
yeah,
many
yeah,
years,
yeah.
it's uninhabitable.
Yeah. I mean like it's like worse than Chernobyl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen the show,
Yeah.
and you know, it's. I imagine it's of similar effect, more devastating, but devastating, of course,
Yeah.
because with Chernobyl it was just a situation of radiation, but you've got now, you know, destruction and the radiation thereafter. So you've leveled
Yeah.
the city, but you've also now made that land uninhabitable.
Yeah.
So, but there you've got different. They call it, is it kilotons they call it, or megatons or whatever.
Kilotons and megatons. Yeah.
So you've got different power.
Yeah.
Essentially, so
so
you've got how far it can get, how it gets there, but then you've also got different power.
Yeah, so you've got like ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they're their like carrier system, which will carry they can be nuclear armed ICBMs.
Okay, so that's the rocket as opposed
Yeah.
to the payload. Okay.
So the thing that would go from some remote wasteland in Russia all over to Washington or
Yeah.
you know wherever, that would be a megaton or kiloton nuke, whatever size it is. Probably not that big because of you know mechanics of flight. It would be powered by an ICBM, and the warhead, the warhead would be nuclear, probably a few kilotons, maybe a mega at best, a few mega at best. But whenever
So it depends what you want to do.
yeah, so like the Chinese at the moment are worrying the West quite a bit, and the Russians with these hypersonic missiles, which can go like Mach 4, Mach 5, I think is the highest they've done. The Americans are a bit behind on that, but the Russians have deployed hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, and they've been shot down by a US Patriot system, which is quite a standard bit of kit for a US military ally. I think we probably have them, the Americans certainly have them. And they shoot
So that
down-
would be a sort of anti-missile defence. So.
yeah, yeah, it's an anti-missile missile in a way.
Yeah.
Like a missile battery, it will be detecting. Like you've probably seen online, Israel has something called Iron Dome, which is an anti-missile system.
Yes, you've shown me videos of it.
Yeah,
actually.
and it bends round
incredible
and
stuff.
yeah. So that's a really good example of an anti-missile system. The Americans have their one called the Patriot, which is deployed in Ukraine, and it's been shooting down the Russian hypersonic, really good missiles. So,
But
you know,
again, if it's nuclear, it's all well and good stopping the missile, but you've also
Yeah.
then just blown up a nuclear weapon.
yeah, so you'd have to anticipate it like over a safe area, which that's when it gets really complex, I suppose.
Right, so you've got to intercept that missile when
Yeah.
it's not over Washington.
Which the Americans might be able to do with their satellite technology, because that's how they detect all the missile tests from North Korea and Pakistan and India. I think they were like looking for particular flashes, and the Russians have their own system as well, because there was an incident where over Norway a missile exploring space in '95 was launched up. And the Norwegians or the European Space Agency told the Russians and said, look, you know, you might see
Something's been launched.
yeah, you'll see on your system something has happened. Is you know on your early warning system for nuclear weapon launches or whatever. It's not. If you know if it happens at this day at time, that's not. It's not nothing to worry about. It's just us. We're sending a rocket up into space to like do some experiments about I don't know particles. And they're like, yeah, sure. But it never got up to the right desk because then they got the flash and it went straight to President Boris Yeltsin's desk saying the West have fired a missile. You have 10 minutes to decide what our response is. And it's the first and currently, that I know of, only time the nuclear suitcase for the Russians was opened. And Boris Yeltsin...
Is it actually a suitcase?
Yeah, it's like a red box or something, I think. The Americans have their own one, which is, you know, it's like a thing you rock on a back. Which is
Really?
probably not what you want. But
It's not a red phone under a glass jar.
yeah, I guess you want to make it look subtle, but not subtle enough that like, oh, I'll steal this and it'll be fine.
And what
oh
that
my
actually-
god, I could launch a nuke.
What actually is that? Is it some sort of an encryptor in reality?
Yeah, it
It's-
must be like some highly technical transmit receive kit to make the go ahead.
doesn't actually launch the missile, but it's kind of like, you know,
It must send the signal, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the president just has like under his desk like
A button.
a nuke button.
Yeah, the red button.
Yeah, but
So-
yeah, I think Yeltsin took 7 or 8 of those 10 minutes before he said no.
What did he base that on? Like, he just didn't.
I have no
I
idea.
have no idea.
Probably someone piped up and said, "Oh yeah, by the
forgot to
way."
tell you.
Yeah, yeah.
So, here's what's interesting to me, right? If have you got to go?
I've got about 5 minutes.
Perfect. What's interesting to me is, you know, let's say the Russians are doing this, they've invaded Ukraine, and then afterwards they intend to, you know, push forward into Poland, assuming they win, of course.
Yeah.
Their whole reason for doing this is for their own security, their own survival,
Absolutely.
in a lot of people's belief, right? You know, Russians have always, throughout modern history, Russians have always tried to, and have succeeded for a lot of it. You know, that they've tried to, you know, control a certain, shall we say, a geopolitical barrier, let's say, for,
Yeah.
you know, for security purposes. Their line, if you will, in the sand. They've tried to, uphold that line that's made up with natural, natural geographical, whatever. But could using a nuclear arsenal rather than bomb your enemy's cities? Is it not possible to use nukes to create some sort of a fence, like a dead zone?
What, like you
Well,
create
rather
like a
than take-
Chernobyl on Russia's barrier?
Well, just, rather than take Ukraine, or certainly rather than take Poland, because then they're taking on NATO,
Yeah,
which they will no doubt lose. To get very, very desperate and no doubt use nukes. Could
Yeah.
they just use, or at very least threaten to use nuclear weapons to create?
like a nuclear no-go zone.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Between Poland and Ukraine, rather than threaten to take out, just so that we're going to blow this area up
Yeah,
so that you can't cross it, but we promise not to progress any further, push the front any further forward. We just don't want you to come past this
Yeah.
line. This is ours. This is yours.
I think.
Let us die out on our own terms, or do whatever.
I think the most you could do is like a nuclear landmine zone, because if you set it up, the risk that they would run if they do, I don't know, let's say they set off 5 tactical bombs around some border.
And made a line.
Yeah. Well, I think legally they would have to put it all in on their territory, because you can't.
Well, it's definitely an act of war if you start doing that on your
Yeah,
neighbours.
if you do it directly on the border,
Yeah.
and the border's only like 2 miles wide, and then the mushroom cloud is, bloody 10 miles wide, you've just declared war because you've technically blown up your neighbour's territory.
You've
with a
gone
nuke.
into, you've gone into their garden.
So they would have to go blow it up so that none of it goes over, and even then they can't guarantee it because the wind will carry it. Because even with Chernobyl, kids over here weren't allowed to play outside for certain amounts of time
Yeah,
because the radiation was carried over, and I think cancer rates went up around those years in European countries because of that. I mean,
So not
correlation
do
isn't
it then,
causation.
but have it as a deterrent.
Yeah, but then if they do that and they blow it up and the wind changes, then
Yeah.
suddenly all that radiation is not going to Europe, it's
It's going to
them.
them. Got
Yeah.
you. Right. Okay. So that doesn't work.
No,
That's
yeah.
too high risk.
Yeah.
So it's better, but to take out a strategic.
Yeah.
Enemy. Yeah, a strategic enemy
'Cause-
site as opposed to yours.
Because really, it's a weapon so devastating that once you lift that, that's like the doors open, the floodgates will open, and
Yeah.
and it's like, well, if this is normalised, then yeah,
Someone's
let's go.
actually done it.
Yeah, because then the only reason it's like you don't get it because it's called unconventional warfare because of the mutually assured destruction. Mad, if I launch a nuke, you'll launch a nuke. No one survives, so no one wins. And
Scorched earth.
Yeah, scorched earth. It's like murder suicide type thing, and that created a period in the 70s called détente, where they said it was like a thawing of relations, and because it was like the threat of if you start something, then I'll destroy you, and but you'll destroy me type thing. That meant the best move to play, which is characterised quite famously in that film War Games, best move to make is no move at all.
Yeah, but there's always that anxiety then,
Yeah, and part of that was they made several agreements in the 70s,
which is just an agreement. Doesn't
Yeah.
actually mean anything.
which is very interesting in hindsight. They made several agreements to under Carter, I think. Yeah, Carter, and maybe there's some other fellow who's seen as a bit of a buffoon. Gerald Ford. They made several. I think maybe Ford. But certainly the other fellow, Carter, made several agreements where they were going to have no anti-nuclear missiles, so like anti-aircraft missiles that can shoot down nukes, because then it perpetuates the threat and that keeps their behaviours contained and keep them both at peace. But then Reagan comes in and goes, fuck that, I'm going to make, then he makes what's it called, the Star Wars program,
Yes.
which is like to shoot down things in outer space, because he's a bit of a reckless cowboy. And then that made things go a lot higher. And then you have things like Able Archer, which is a nuclear scare. The Russians were having missiles pointed at Germany and wherever, because that was a big NATO exercise, which they thought was a pretext for an actual nuclear weapon launch, which probably wouldn't have happened if we kept those agreements in the 70s. Yeah, it's quite interesting to see how it all plays out. Again, like a butterfly effect type thing.
Is there a situation where we demonstrate that we've all dismantled our nuclear arsenal?
No.
I don't think so either, because even if we did that, we could always be keeping one locked up.
Yeah, I think the only way you're going to get rid of nukes is to use them.
Is
And
to
then-
use them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, once they're blown up, everything will be so destitute.
So if the Russians are desperate and they're trying to, plug the potential, access points into Russia proper,
Yeah.
which is what I believe they're doing in Ukraine. They're doing it for their own survival, their own security purposes. What we've talked about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you part in part believe that, but let's just say it's correct. What do you think they'd settle for? Because they know and we know that if they do come into Poland, it's kind of a lose-lose for everybody.
I think the thing the Russians would really want to do would be to settle as the battleground shows right now, which is they control about 1/5 of Ukraine in the east, and which mainly makes up those like puppet republics of Luhansk and Donetsk. I think
Is that a good enough geographical barrier there? Is it for them? So there's some protection.
there's not really a geographical barrier there, because they had a ceasefire there before, but for like 7 years prior, they've been fighting inconsistently over it, shelling each other's towns and whatnot, just to try and flare.
So it's kind of like so that would be very much we've lost.
Yeah,
But
but the Russians would play it off.
we want these as the spoils of war.
Yeah, the Russians would
Save a little bit of face.
the media arm of the Russian, the Russian state media would spin it off and say, look, we did exactly what we wanted to.
We took part of Ukraine.
Yeah, we took part of Ukraine, we pushed the Nazis out, we denazified it and whatnot. But I think
the Nazi gay demons.
Yeah. And I think, but really, it would be anything but the entire capitulation of the country would be a loss, because
Well, they've scorched it. Is
Yeah.
that what you mean?
if they don't take all of Ukraine, then technically they've not done what they would.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Because they went as far as to go to, they dropped parachute troops into Hostomel airport, which is like west of Ukraine, of Kiev, to then take Kiev, and they didn't do it. So like, it makes no sense then to say, oh yeah, the plan all along was to take this thin eastern region when you dropped troops 100 miles west of that point. Why would you do that to just take a small thing? Obviously you were going for Kiev and to try, there were like 15 failed assassination attempts of Zelensky or something like that. So
15?
yeah, don't take my word for it.
No,
that
but
number, but
multiple.
there were multiple failed attempts. So like, if your whole aim was to take a thin bit of land, like even the Argentinians didn't try and assassinate Margaret Thatcher when they were trying to take the Falklands. Why would you assassinate the leader if you weren't going to then put a puppet in, which they've done with every other part of land they've done. So that clearly is the aim, was to take the whole of Ukraine.
Yeah,
And
sure. But they'll do what they do and spin it.
yeah, they'll spin it. Putin's got very good spin doctors, and the Russians there are so indoctrinated.
As we all are.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we're all drinking our own Kool-Aid.
Yeah, that they'll believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't, you get thrown to the gulag or wherever they put what's his name, Navalny.
Navalny.
Yeah, I mean he's all right. Apparently he's a bit of a xenophobe, but yeah, I don't think there's really any good characters there. Navalny seems all right because he's not very corrupt or anything, and he seems to be a very good journalist and lawyer. But lawyers and journalists seem to die quite well, or quite a lot in that area. It's quite a dangerous profession to be in Russia if you get on the wrong side of them.
Yeah, no, sure.
But yeah, I think they'll spin it
So you see that as the best,
that's
the most probable outcome.
well, I see that as that would benefit the Russians right here and now, would be to.
But only from a safe face point of view. They're still in the
Yeah.
same position they
Yeah.
were before the war, which was they're still vulnerable.
Yeah, because it's just
militarily, strategically, in as much as
Yeah.
there's open access to Russia proper,
Yeah.
geographic open access to Russia proper.
yeah, it still has quite a large front. So,
Right.
And if anything, it'll be more dangerous because the Ukrainians are going to want to take that land back because
So now that-
the matter of fact is that the argument the Russians used to invade Ukraine would then have the same argument to invade what would then be Russia.
Yeah, so there's going to be it's realistic to say there's going to be probably a multi-decade conflict.
Yeah, they're
between-
calling it a frozen conflict. So
frozen conflict.
yeah, and Putin will just thaw it and unthaw it whenever it suits him. I.e., his polls are dropping, unthaw it. There's a common enemy and I can defeat them. His polls go up, he wins elections again.
Yeah, you've said that to me before.
Yeah.
You think a lot of it is not just about expanding Russia out to the point where they've got geographical barriers, so they're protected from external forces attacking. It's also you think it's very much in aid of political runs and.
Yeah, because they have plans to take Belarus back as well, according to leaked documents.
But they're still part of Belarus, aren't they?
No, Belarus is a separate country.
I know that,
Yeah.
but in as much as Belarus and Russia,
Yeah, they're
Belarus
very-
is closer to Russia, very simply put.
Yeah, well, the
as opposed to-
Belarusian state were the only ones to vote to stay in the
So
Soviet
that's
Union.
what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lukashenko wanted to use that. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, he wanted to use that as a springboard to then take over the Soviet Union. But in the early days, Putin was already put paid to that and turned him into his own lapdog. But the only reason Belarus is a separate country and Lukashenko is still ruling it is simply because Putin wills it. As soon as he wants it, he'll take it.
He's just sort of.
He's just a puppet.
He's just
Yeah, but the Belarusians are, which is why I don't know why he didn't.
Right.
Well, I guess the Belarusians, he's got control over them anyway, no matter what. They still have a KGB.
Who do?
Belarusia.
Oh, do they?
Belarus.
Belarus, yeah, Belarus.
Yeah.
Kinda.
But yeah,
The
they're,
new name.
yeah, that's really what he wants to take. He wants to take Ukraine. He wants to take Belarus through like a union rather than a war. And he'll probably go after Poland and the Baltic states.
Which is NATO.
Yeah, which is NATO, which is why they joined NATO, because they saw it coming. And if you speak to any of the people in like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they'll all say like, the Russians are they're on their way. It's just a matter of time, and that's why they joined NATO, because like NATO is they say NATO expansion. That's the reason why we're doing it, but the methodology and their actions are actually very different. Because to join NATO, you need to have approval of all member nations, which is why it's taken Sweden a hell of a long time, because the Turks want to squeeze some concessions out of the Americans, using Sweden as a bit of a bat to hit them with. That's by the by. But you need everyone in there to be. There's another story.
Yeah.
You need everyone in there to vote. You need to be a certain level of like anti-corruption or development, like with your economy and with your progress into democracy. So you can't
a
just
certain
join.
amount of your GDP has to be devoted to defence, doesn't it? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
2%. Yeah. There is
2%.
Yeah, there's so many criteria you need to meet before you can even be considered, and then you have to meet certain other things. You have to have meetings and agreements and whatnot. You have to, the military has to be interoperable with the other militaries because you need to be a certain standard. Whereas the Russians are just like taking it by force and bombing cities until they capitulate. And it's like they're not the same. NATO expansion and the Russian
So what
invasion, they're not the same.
sort of for
Might throw it up in a little bit.
well, very quickly,
Yeah.
there, it's a good place to end actually. You sort of when and why was NATO set up, and what is it? Why do people, what is it? How does it actually benefit
Those
people that
member
want to be a
nations.
member
So
today? What's the point of
Yeah.
its existence?
NATO was formed in 1949 as a collective, it was North American treaty organisation, and at its heart is
1989,
1949.
1949. Sorry,
Um,
yeah.
And really, it's because
So post World War II.
yes, because there was still a scare that the Russians were going to pile on through. They weren't going to stop at Berlin, and they were going to take all the other nations and cause a war, another war.
Yeah. So
Um,
just before the Cold War ended, is it?
Began. So really, NATO is
Oh, no, of
like
course.
yeah.
I'm getting my dates mixed up. Yeah.
But basically, because there was something called the Berlin Airlift, and I can't remember if that was pre or post NATO, but basically, the Berlin Airlift was Stalin's attempt to take Berlin after the war. He got the Russians to surround all of Berlin, which is fully in eastern Germany.
Yeah.
And he said, "You're not." He tried to siege it basically, and said, "No allies come in, no nothing comes in, and no supplies and nothing." And he was going to starve the city out, I assume. But then the Americans and the Allies, with their air forces, came together in a massive logistical operation to continuously fly planes and drop supplies in, to keep the city running and to keep them from capitulating to the Russians. And Stalin wasn't really looking for a war, and so he backed off. And I don't know if that's pre or post NATO, but I think it influenced them greatly. And that's where you get NATO. NATO is basically, all you've got to know about NATO is it's a collective defence organisation where, summarised in Article 5 of their charter, which is their like Bible agreement type thing, they say an attack on one is judged to be an attack on all. So let's say
You push him, you push me.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like if France were attacked, then Britain will take the actions necessary to defeat that attacker as if they were being attacked, and America would do the same, and Canada would do the same, and Germany and Poland and whoever else is in there. And I think it's like 28 nations now, so it's quite a force to be reckoned with. You know, if you attack one of these nations, can you imagine if Ukraine was part of NATO and then 29 other nations come to its aid?
Yeah.
The Russians wouldn't stand a chance.
Yeah.
So, and that's the whole part of it. Is it's so
Well, there's a lot of people that think that they invaded Ukraine because of the proximity to NATO, NATO's proximity to Russia.
yeah. That's
It was kind of poking the dog with a stick, sort of.
yeah. I think though that's an invention made by Putin to try and secure his own rule, because he's an authoritarian, he's a populist, strongman ruler. They need to have an enemy to go after,
To maintain strength.
to show how strong they are, even because they're actually not.
An enemy's,
A very unifying
A superhero is
factor.
nothing without a supervillain.
Yeah, exactly. And NATO just fits that narrative best for Putin and his ruling style.
Right.
It's a very convenient scapegoat. So, it keeps him in his power, it keeps him in his riches. The Panama Papers or the Paradise Papers show he's like one of the richest people in the world unofficially, because it's all stored away through offshore bank
Various-
accounts and stuff,
yeah.
which he and his cronies know how to do, because that's how they did it as KGB operatives. They know how to get through the Western banking system, because that's how they operated in Austria, Germany, France, wherever they were posted. They were able to do it under the radar, undetected, and that's how all him and his cronies have been able to get plush pounds in London and whatnot. So yeah, I think NATO is just a very convenient scapegoat. It is a very powerful defensive organisation, but if it really was that much of a threat, he wouldn't have waited 20 years to invade. Because he was saying to George Bush in the early 2000s that Ukraine wasn't a state, and now it just suddenly it's 20 years later when nothing really has happened there. Apparently, it's so much of a problem that he's going to go after it. It's because his polls were dipping. It was the same before the Crimean invasion. It was the same before the Georgian invasion, and it was the same thing that helped him gain popularity and get his first presidential bid in the early 2000s with the war in Chechnya, because he was head of the FSB who said they should invade, and then they did. But yeah, probably that's all I've got time for. Unfortunately, it's half one.
Is it really?
Yeah.
This has been fun, Steve.
Yeah, some good fun.
Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Let's if you're game, let's aim to do one a week.
Yeah.
You up for that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I wouldn't mind over Zoom or something, because I don't know how how busy I'm going to get with stuff. But if it's convenient, yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Zoom's fine for me. I'd sooner do it in person. You know,
Yeah.
we catch each other when we're in. But Zoom's good. Like I said, for me, it's about you know, just you know, clocking hours, clocking minutes.
Yeah.
Practice.
Yeah.
Repetition, doing it again and again and again until we you know, enjoying it along the way. But you know, doing it until we get better and seeing
Yeah.
what we come up with.
Yeah.
It's been fun, man.
Yeah.
I'll catch you before day's out.
Yeah, are you going into the lab at all?
Probably at some point. I mean, I'm not working there because I don't need to be working
right,
in there.
yeah.
I don't want to take up desk space. But I'll be here or in the room over there.
Yeah. It's quite a nice little workspace around here.
I like it. Yeah.
Have you been to Ashby before?
Yeah, I spent
Yeah.
less time in Ashby.
Do you know, I think if Ashby was sort of like the office space down the hill,
Yeah.
it would be pretty decent here.